Okay, welcome back to the introductory videos for the NCTC course you'll be taking in a couple of weeks on species distribution and habitat modeling. So this is the second of the introductory videos, and this one deals with developing an intended use for your distribution and habitat model. Now, what you're going to learn here is why distribution and habitat models are important for conservation and for organizing concepts that can help you develop an intended use. And I'll motivate that by providing some examples of how this can occur. And again, as mentioned in Module 1.1, we don't really do anything in R on this because this is just an introduction. Okay, so why do we care about them? It's simple. Distribution and range maps are central to management and conservation. It's been that way since day one, and it will be that way, as best I can tell, forever. Now, what you're going to see when you actually go out and examine these is a host of I should say breadth of different types of distribution, range maps, habitat maps. Now, for example, this is what I commonly refer to as the blob distribution. This right here is the land tenure distribution. And this is for the dark kangaroo mouse. Now, it also has 13 subspecies, so there's tons of taxonomic confusion right here. But you can kind of see sometimes you end up with something that's like that, which can be distressing for a host of reasons we'll discuss later. And you look at this and you go, yeah, that makes more sense. This reminds one of Peterson's bird maps or Little's forest maps or something like this. But then you sometimes see strange mixes. Now, granted, this is an old map of the bull trout. Fish Wildlife Service has updated this, and I just use it as an illustrative example. So we're dealing with a fish. Now, any one of us can get this. We see this dendritic complex right here, which we presume means certain reaches of watersheds. But then we're back to this kind of like large tenure-based thing. But what is all this? Because don't fish need water? I mean, I guarantee you that big chunks of Western Idaho, Eastern Oregon, and southeastern states of Washington are, kind of dry sagebrush land or something like that. But this is just to let you see that you're likely to encounter a host of these things. And we'll talk, of course, about trying to get away from these, move more to this, and hopefully head towards something like that. Now, the use and application of some form of geographic range of a species does not exist in a vacuum, and it will require some form of objective, question, or hypothesis as the foundation. Otherwise, why are you doing it? Unless, of course, it's just an academic ivory white tower. But again, as I mentioned in Module 1.1, an intent of this course is to develop distribution habitat models that can be used in a management and conservation. Now, in the world of distribution models, we can frame or we can categorize this framework into one or more of the following. Why is the element you're interested in there? Where is the element located? How much of the element is there? And how might this element be changing over time? Now, these are four very central questions that deal with geographic range. And it's a good starting location for you to begin to think about what is going to be the intended use of my habitat model. Am I going to be interested in why? That's our ecological understanding. Where it's located, that's the spatial prediction. How much can rely on this spatial, and how might it change over time provides an opportunity to permutate the environmental predictors your model has been built with and see what changes might occur. But I call all of this an intended application because it helps you to organize the thoughts that are going to be the foundation for your distribution and habitat model. Why is it there? Oftentimes, the underlying ecological reasons the element is found in particular locations and not elsewhere. Where? This again is the use of GIS linked with ecological understanding. And there's an astonishing array of map products that we can use to depict where elements are located on landscapes. How much? This often translates into an estimation of population numbers or some measure of the quantities of habitat, and that is a fundamental element of sound management and conservation. Now, I'm going to attach a caveat here because we're going to discuss what quantity means in greater detail later on in the course. It's not as conceptually easy as it sounds. So I'm just throwing that out as a teaser for right now. And how is it changing? Well, organisms' distributions are not static. They do shift across landscapes due to many ecological and human-based factors. And this, of course, again, is a very important conservation and management framework for you to be considering. So let's look at a couple of examples so you can see what I'm talking about. When it comes to the why is it there, what characteristics of forest stand structure, the why, provide good bird nesting habitat element? Now you can put in whatever bird you want there. You can put in whatever element of its life history you want there. Where is the element located? So where might a rare plant likely be in relation to proposed energy development? Is there likely to be a conflict between the development of the infrastructure necessary to extract energy and where a rare plant might be? How much of the element is there? The easy example to think of here is how much of an organism's habitat or range might be considered protected versus not protected. Say how much of it is in a national park versus multi-use land, such as that of Forest Service and BLM, versus private lands. So you can actually turn around and come up with some estimations there. And last, of course, is how might the predicted distribution of a tree change over time, given some form of future landscape? What I'd like you to do right now in this introduction is keep these objectives simple for right now and use these examples to motivate thinking of your intended uses for your particular species or group of species. And it's also important to note that combinations of these four questions are perfectly okay. So it might be that I need to understand where something is located and how much of something is as a two-pronged approach to development. Conceivably, you can use all four. Now, I also need to point out that there is no way you can optimize all four of these intended uses at the same time. So you may find yourself having to prioritize or rank which of these is most important. But again, undergoing that mental machination right here is what's going to help you develop a sound and defensible intended use. Again, some examples. This is a predictive model of likely locations of the the routes of an invasive plant, the common mullein, in Lava Beds National Park. So it's a why application because we're using why is it there? Because in this particular case, the National Park Service, in terms of mitigating the impact of this invasive plant species, literally drove down roads with, 40 gallons of Roundup on their back to try to locate this particular invasive plant. And so, given that question, you can see how that structured the particular model that was used because components necessary for this included things such as distance to road. But it also included some ecological predictors as well. And these then became readily interpretable variables and that were then portrayed in a map product. So this is a good example of a why. Now here's a where. Nesting habitat for the northern goshawk in the Intermountain West. So where are they likely to be found? And then that can help motivate conservation in terms of where can we harvest timber to minimize the potential impacts on nesting habitat. Now, I want to point out here, as I said in the introduction, this has to deal with potential nest habitat, and not all of that is actual. But think about what a Forest Service biologist might need to do. Say a timber harvest is proposed right here. They can then take this map and go out and increase their efficiency in searching for a goshawk nest. So a great example of how a where application as an intended use can help in management and conservation. Here's another one. Here's another where. Optimize consultation surveys of regions. So this right here was an actual proposed energy development located in this location in the Colorado Plateau inside Utah. Distribution models were built for this plant species. These dark areas say high likelihood. In an ensemble context, 5 of 5 models, only one by the time you got up here. So this is what I call a regulatory use model because is a survey a survey warranted since it's a listed plant species right there in these locations and versus a survey being warranted in here. Again, this particular where application can enhance the efficiency of going out to deal with conservation issues. This is a change application. This is a Canadian-based model of where aspen zones are likely to contract based on changes in climate. And the climate relationships are those ecological predictors. So they just didn't willy-nilly make this up. They took current, looked at a variety of environmental predictors that are associated with aspen presence, looked at the future projected climate change of those predictors, and then remodeled the presence under that change. So this is kind of a classic change application as an intended use. Now, I mentioned earlier that sometimes we can use these types of models in a non-spatial context. Now, granted, one can use a spatial output as a model to, estimate how many of things, but this is a case of for lichen species. This was all part of the Forest Service's old Survey and Manage program, which was an outcome of the listing of the northern spotted owl. And what these represent is numbers of pixels where the organism is likely to be found. Again, this is a good instance of where you can now go out, test this, but also provide some feel as to whether or not this particular species has a high abundance on the landscape or is locally rare or whatever kinds of models. Oftentimes, these can be referred to as abundance trend models. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the introduction. And here indeed is your first exercise, which of course is linked back to this module 1.2. Now, the context of this exercise is that defensible distribution habitat models depend on clearly articulated objectives. I argue or call this intended uses. So what I'm asking you to do is select a species of your choice. I don't care what it is. I'm sure you have one or more or you wouldn't be taking this course. I'd like you to develop a set of intended uses of a distribution model for that species, focusing on the lessons you just saw in Module 1.2. I'd like you to write this out at a maximum 2-page PowerPoint. Nope, no R coding associated with that. And here's the elements. Pick your species. If you have trouble, go to Fish and Wildlife Services ECOS and pick one from there. Once you've chosen one, I'd like you to answer these 3 questions. Which of the 3 philosophical backgrounds, back to Module 1.1, are most likely of relevance to your selected species? Remember, this is the Grinnellian approach, the Eltonian, or the Hutchinsonian. And give me a couple of bullets as to why. Second, what form of output from 1.1 is likely to be most relevant to your species? Now, remember, we talked about 2 that are not mutually exclusive and have some overlap, and these are a predictive distribution model versus an explanatory model. Tell me which one of these is going to be most relevant. And if you have some feel that there's going to be an overlap, try to tell me which might be more important. Is the spatial product more important or is the ecological understanding? So then just develop a couple of bullet statements of the intended uses using the 4 objectives there. Now, what I want you to do is bring this PowerPoint to the first day of class, and we'll just randomly pick a few of you. I have a tendency to just randomly pick people. You are not safe sitting in the back row, just to let you know how that works. And I'll ask you to share these with the class so that we can have a little bit of discussion about intended use and developing intended use statements before you actually begin building a species distribution and habitat model. And with that, we are at the end of Module 1.2, and we will be starting Module 1.3 next, which has to deal with decision risk. So again, this ends the video associated with Module 1.2, which is developing intended use statements for your particular species. And it does have an exercise that I'd like you to complete before you show up on the course on Monday, the 22nd. Okay, we're on to the next module then.